Hello everyone and welcome back to Painting with Martin. Today we're going to do something a little bit different that we haven't done before. I know I say this a lot, but since I just started the channel a couple of months ago, everything is more or less a learning process for me as well, and I hope it is for you as well, as I'm teaching you how to paint miniatures. We're looking at something called Waylanders, the board game from Draco Ideas, and this is actually a game that I actually got from the company called Draco Ideas. And I want to try and say this in Spanish because they are from Spain. So let's see if my rusty Spanish is up to date. Muchas gracias por el juego a Draco Ideas. So I hope that was all right. So thank you very much for giving me this game from them. So Draco Ideas, please check out the link in the comment for their website. But back to painting. Draco Ideas produced many nice games, but this is one of them. The Waylanders board game is set in a Celtic fantasy world where you will be pitting different heroes and fighting with these heroes against other heroes on a kind of like tile-shaped landscape. The heroes are as following. Like, you have Brigg here, which is one of the heroes we're going to paint today, and you have other heroes such as, well, this guy, and you can see they're really beautifully sculpted. And I'm going to simply show you how to paint one of these miniatures. I'm going to start with actually painting this one. This is what we're going to paint today, was actually Brigg. And I'm going to show you how to play the game a little bit. Not really play the game, but I'm going to show you how I'm going to talk a little bit how the game is played and what the main concepts of the game are while the paint is drying. So this is what we call one of these Painttalks series. What I'm going to do, I talk about the game while I'm painting it. And you're going to see a few more of these videos, and if you like them, don't hesitate to share, like, and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate that. But when it comes to this Brigg character here, you can see that I'm looking only at the card art, and you can see that from this miniature here, you can see that he has a blue kind of like tunic and so on as well. So with that said, it's going to be quite, I think it's going to be fairly quite easy to paint this one. And we're going to start by painting his kind of like trousers over here. And then going on to paint his kind of like leather, leg armor, if that's the correct word for it. So by doing so, I'm going to select one of my brushes. It's a size 2 golden maple brush. I got these from Amazon. They're really, really cool. It worked really well. And I'm going to start with giving them a coat of Citadel's Rhinox hide. I've diluted them a little bit with the water, so it's not too thick. And I'm going to focus them on this area here, okay, as well as the back of the leather, kind of leather armor. And I want to take great care not to actually paint the armor itself, as well as not the shoes or whatever he's wearing here. I'm also not painting the top here because that's also part of the cloth armor, or I want to paint in different color. So it can be a bit fiddly to get a hang of this, all of it, but I think you'll do a much better job than what I'm doing. I can take off my glasses now because I paint much better with them. That's what happens with old age. Some of you may realize that as well. And as you can see, it's fairly thin because I don't want to obscure the beautiful details of this miniature. Wayland, the board game, is set in a Celtic fantasy world of Brigantia. It's in a time where magic is still reigning, and you see that in different classes of these games. This is this guy here, Brigg, is a guardian, so he's a melee character, but there are healers, there are spellcasters, and as well as ranged combat ranged warriors as well. Warriors the word, not combat guys. What was I thinking about that word? And in the game, your goal is to score victory points, either by taking objectives or simply conquering strongholds, which is kind of like, you know, beautiful areas where you can score victory points. And by doing so, you're trying to get ahead of the opponent, who's also trying to do this. Okay. So, sorry if I went out of camera. So this is what it looks like. Is leg armor or leg breeches. And you can also paint the inner sides here of his underpants. You may need 1 or 2 layers, depending on how well how much you diluted the paint. But I'm only going to give you the very basics here. So if you thin the paint very, very thinly, go for 2 layers. And if you had a quite thick paint, just go for 1. So, oh, sorry, I went out of camera here, it happens. See if I can focus, something like that, so you can see. Now, don't forget to rinse your brush when you're done. And then we're going to look straight into the leather armor on his legs. And I'm going to use a color that you might be familiar with by this stage, if you followed me, called red leather from Vallejo. And I mixed this one in very heavily with water. So it's almost looking like a it's almost like a shade or a wash. And you'll see that it's kind of like, it barely covers it. But I did that because these leather greaves, I think that's the word for it, are so beautiful. So I really didn't want the paint to obscure anything. You can see that. And I want to make sure that we can actually highlight these ones in a much better way. So just cover these ones in 1 thin layer. If you miss some white spots, then don't worry. I just want to make sure as well that these ones don't come primed. So I primed this one using a white spray can primer. You can find the way to do so in one of my other videos if you look at the channel. The basic painting tips. That's what do you call it? That's the playlist. Playlist, that's the word. And then I had a thin coat of Vallejo's white grey over it to make sure it sticks. This paint really sticks to the plastic. And it's really necessary to prime these ones. But as I said, if you feel that you haven't covered in white spots or anything, don't worry, we're going to cover it with a shade afterwards. So with that said, we're now going to move into the shoes. Paint the lower figure first with Citadel's Mournfang Brown. And I'm applying this one neat as it is from the box, or not from the box, but from the jar, and only for the shoes. The card art for this board game is beautiful. The only problem I have with the card art is that it doesn't show the entire figure. As you can see here, it only shows the upper part of him. So with that said, I I took a look at some historical pictures of what Celts were wearing at the time, and this is as close as I'm going to come, because you have to remember metal was very, very expensive at the time. Warriors, even though the Celts were a warrior caste society, metal was a symbol of great wealth. So if you had a steel helmet or steel chainmail, it was something phenomenal. I heard a comparison that if you had chainmail, it was the equivalent of buying a house in modern day prices, or even buying a really good sports car. So chainmail was a symbol of great pride as well as wealth. So only the nobles and like the noble class and the people with great wealth could actually afford one. So with that said, that's why I'm painting this one's leather protection in like the leg arm in leather, because leather was more handily available and it was much cheaper. I'm also going to paint. You can either do Mournfang brown for this little area here, or you can do red leather, and I'm going to do Mournfang brown. Simply because I want to show you that there's a little bit of a difference here. With this one, I've actually thinned the Mournfang brown with a little bit of water, so you can just see beautiful, the beautiful details here of this coat. The shoes don't really have that many details, so that's why I'm leaving it. With that said, you can also paint the Mournfang brown here with the belt, which is up here, so you can just continue with that. And I'm holding the paintbrush really close to the bristles for maximum control, so you don't see it that much. With the same color, I'm going to go on and paint the shield, and the shield's the back side of the shield only. It's going to be a bit tricky to get hang of this, because you don't want to paint the brim of the shield, because that's going to be in a metal color as per the card art. And we're going to go back to this stage as well, but since we're already painting it and we already have our brush loaded with this paint, we might as well just paint this area as well here. And we're not going to paint the front of the shield, not yet, because I have another plan for that. With that said, we're actually going into a really nice part of the stage of the miniature right now, and we're going to paint the tunic with some Vallejo's royal blue. I'm going to put down the miniature for a second. I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to close the jar of the Mournfang brown, because if I don't, I will spill it all over. That's just my luck. And royal blue is a very it's a bit darker blue color, and I'm mixing it a little bit with the water because I don't want to obscure some of the details here. And as you can see, I missed some parts here with the leather here, but you apply it with a thin layer or with a thicker layer if you're a bit lazy, across the area here, taking great care trying not to cover the brown leathery parts that you just painted. And you can see here there is a little bit of kind of like a strap or something like that. I'm going to try not to cover it. Going to go around it. You can, if you want more control, you can switch to size 1 brush if you want to. And don't forget the upper part here is also blue. And the lower part here, I'm going to angle it here so you will see it. With some practice, you will get the hang of this really quickly. Don't worry if you will cover some area here, you can always clean it up afterwards when the paint is dry and go back to the previous stage if you covered over a brown area, or simply you cover parts of the shield or something like that. Now, I've loaded the paint, the brush with quite a lot of paint here, so I can cover it, and I will continue painting it until it's almost completely has no paint on it. I'm going to paint this upper part here as well, also blue, so a large portion of the miniature is going to be covered in this beautiful blue color. It can be a little bit fiddly to get behind all these areas under it. I'm going to try to get a little bit closer to this strap here. That's more or less how it can be. You can cover over some of the areas here you missed here as well. Really starting to look a little bit better, the miniature. Now, with Mr. White dot there, a bit annoying, but the good thing about spray painting it or priming it in white, you can easily see what you're missing. Black, you will actually easily be able to obscure the detail. You can forget some of the details because you just say it's a black spot. Now with the blue tunic actually done, I'm now going to go over to the fur here, and as per the card art, you can only see hints on this area here that it's not brown, but it's more like a grey or light grey area. So I'm going to paint it first in a heavy grey using a color called Mechanicus Standard Grey. I don't know if you can see that here, hopefully you can. Mechanicus Standard Grey from Citadel, which is a very it's a very good color to have. I strongly recommend getting it. There are some Vallejo's equivalents. You can use coal grey or neutral grey as well. Make sure you wipe off the brush with and clean the brush after every time. And after this one is done, we're going to go on to painting part of the shield and the sword. I'm using this one neat off camera, putting it on. And same thing here, I'm trying to cover the whole area, and I'm going to try not to cover kind of like the helmet plume over here as well as the helmet itself. If you just clean the brush and the brush has some water on it while you apply the Citadel's color, that's perfectly fine. It will appear a little bit more waterish, but that means you just need a second layer. Now you can see here, I don't know if you can, up here from the side here, there's kind of like a thin line here. It's called a mold line. So what you do here when you encounter those things is you could take a very sharp knife and you cut it away. They're not supposed to be part of the final miniature, but simply it's a leftover of the production process. And they're annoying when you find them. Fortunately, I have to say, these models had very few of them, which made my prep work a lot easier. I'm going all the way inside the shield here, but not all the way because there is a hand here as well, and I don't want to obscure that hand when we're going to paint it with the skin color afterwards. Now I'm turning the figure a little bit on the side here, and you can see there's, I'm not painting the grey all the way. I'm leaving a small white area here, and I'm going to cover that with either blue, or I'm going to coat it with some different brown. But the front is equally important. And for the final part of the fur coat here, looking quite okay. Before you actually decide to go on to the next part, make sure that you haven't missed any part that's supposed to be fur coats, and then you have it right here. We're leaving there to dry, and before we go into to the skin areas, we're going to paint the sword and we're going to paint the brim of the shield. I'm going to close the Mechanicus standard grey jar because we're not going to use it for a while now, and then clean my brush in between. I have a paint jar filled with water on the side here, you don't see, and then I'm going to go over to a color here that I really like, called Vallejo's German Grey, and I'm going to paint the sword with that color, and I'm going to paint the shield brim as well as the shield boss. So that's the shield boss in the middle. I used to do some Viking medieval fighting, so the shield boss can be devastating when we get into your face, so try not to do that if you're into those kind of fighting, but it's also a really good technique. I'm painting the sword with this color, but only the blade of the sword, taking great care not to actually touch the pommel and the hand guard. And the reason for why I actually choose this color, not metal straight away, is that I wanted to have a darker look, and when we apply the shades, it can actually shade the metal much better, and the white won't shine through. I really like the way the sword has been sculpted. It's very beautiful. It's a delight to paint. And don't forget the upper part as well. I'm applying it neat. I'm also applying now for the brim of the shield, and I'll tell you why I do that, because that will create a nice border of dark color before we apply the lighter color of the wood on the front. And just painting an outline like this first before you actually fill in the details will actually help you of deciding where the outline is going to be. It's a quite useful tip in my opinion. I don't like praising myself, but I learned this from another painter, and this works really well. And then I'm painting the top. As well as the sides. And turning over on the side. Here I missed a part. And you can see here, if I were to touch the fur coat here with this black color, it wouldn't really matter that much because it's still so dark and I can easily obscure later on with the shades. Here I want to take great care, trying my best not to touch the blue. And hopefully not cursing too much for YouTube to shut down my channel if I do curse. As you can see here, I left a small part of white here, and this is actually quite important that I cover it. Now it's going to be a little bit tricky deciding where the line is going to be. So if you're happy with this result, you can just go there, because the card art doesn't give you that much to go for. Now shields weren't made entirely perfect in this stage, in this time of this fantasy world, so you can say that, yeah, well, this guy got a class grade B or like grade B shield, you know, when he bought it. He spent everything on his sword, and then, you know, the shield was like kind of like the last one to get funded. Now painting this part as well here. Now you can already see that we painted the brown part here. And with that said, I'm going to paint the helmet as well. You can either paint the helmet in a leather color with metal bands around it, but I'm going to give it helmet a metal look as well, because I think that it will stand out quite well from the rest of the miniature. Helmets, I would say that this one, the Celtic helmet, is quite typical. They often had hair plumes. Some of them did, some of them did not. And you can see here I'm going down here on the chin guard. Gonna try not to paint the face with this one. As well as the small nose guard. Something like this would be quite okay. Now, with that said, I'm now going to go through and paint the hair plume, and I'm going to do that hair plume with some Rhinox hide from Citadel, as per the card art. I've thinned it a little bit, so not to obscure some of the details here. And with that one done, I'm now going to go over and paint, not the face yet because it's still not dry with the helmet, but I'm going to go over and paint the inside of the shield and then the metal parts finally. Hopefully it will be dry. Yes, it will be dry. So for the shield, just like before, I'm using Mournfang brown. And this one I'm using not entirely neat, but a little bit diluted. As you can see here, it's quite fluid. Something like this. If it's too fluid, this is a good technique. Wipe your brush off clean and let it soak it up and just distribute it the way you want it. And therefore you can see the white is almost shining through and it's kind of like a heavy wash. Just like what we did with the leather brace, leather arm guard. Oh, not arm guard, but leg guard. With this said, I'm going to go straight over it again to the arm guards and red leather from Vallejo again. Also very thin this time. As well as the other side. And you can paint this little strap here as well with this one. Also very thin. Okay. Now for the next part, here I'm going to paint the metal. Actually no, I'm going to paint the skin color using Kislev Flesh from Citadel. Using it neat. But not too much paint on the bristles. The details will come out here in the wash. Now it just looks like a blob, but they will come out. Here there's some details here for you to see. There is the arm here coming through. And on the other side here as well. The inside of this area here can also be painted where he lacks the armor, as well as his arm over here inside. All the way. And straightening up this area. Now the final stage is going to be some metal on this one and the sword, but we are going to actually cover this one with some brown. Actually, let's put let's put some brown on it. Some Rhinox hide from before will give it a nice contrast with the leather. Kind of like he's having an under tunic here. And as well as this part here. That means we don't want to leave anything that is completely not covered with paint afterwards. And you can see maybe it's also kind of some kind of strap here. Something like that. Now, for the metal parts, I'm using a color called gunmetal grey from Vallejo. Give it a good shake, and then put it out. I'm putting it out neat. It's a very dark metallic paint. And the reason I'm using a darker metallic paint is that I want it really to shine better when we actually paint the highlights. However, I want the sword to be darker than the arm guard, as well as the pommel and the handle. So that's why we're painting it over the white part, leaving it a little bit lighter to contrast off with the dark already. You may need 1 or 2 layers here to get the nice finish that you're looking for, both for the sword as well as the arm guard on the shield. You can see how I missed here part of the red leather, which I may have to fix later. Let's look at the shield trim, and now we can actually paint over any mistakes we made with the paint bill being a bit too fluid, as well as any mistake we did in white, as well as the metal part, as well as the round shield ring underneath. By having a darker metal paint here, it's easier to actually paint over mistakes. And you can see that the metal part of the inner shield, it will come out a bit lighter than the shield brim itself, and it will act as a small highlight. Normally these shield brims were made out of cowhide leather, but metal was sometimes prevalent as well. And now finally for, I missed a part here for this part. And now part for the helmet. Trying not to touch the face. All right, something like this is all the base colors. This is what it looks like, and it looks a lot better than just the white figure that you saw from the beginning, I hope. And while this one dries, we're going to go over to the next stage of the painting, which is shades. And while the shades dried, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the game. Now, this is what it looks like. I painted one before. It looks fairly similar. And we're actually now going to apply the shades. we're going to apply some brown shade, Agric Earth shade over all thing that is our brown or leather, Agric Earth shade from Citadel. We're going to apply Null oil or black shade, Null oil from Citadel, or Vallejo black wash from over the metal parts, as well as the grey fur parts. As finally, we're going to apply Drakenhof Nightshade over the blue parts from Citadel. And one thing I forgot, as always, the skin parts, Reichland Flesh Shade from Vallejo, from Citadel. And we're going to start with some black wash. We apply neat over all things that are metal. You want to make sure that it doesn't pool on the surfaces, but it pools in all the recesses. And you apply it, of course, neat. Maybe I said that. Angling the model so it doesn't pool over the other areas. And you can already see some of the details coming out really nicely. That's why we use a shade. It's also called a wash. Don't forget the boss, the shield brim and the shield boss. And the helmet. As well as the sword handle and pommel. Okay, with the black shade already done, we're turning our attention to the Reichland Flesh Shade. And give every bottle a good shake before you apply the wash, because otherwise the pigments are staying in the bottom and we don't want that. Here I painted alternatively some Reichland Flesh Shade on the back here. You could have done that too. Just showing you that I painted this miniature before. As well as the front of the hand here. And that's it. Now, next one. The shade is much quicker than the base paint. We're now turning our attention to all the brown parts, which is going to be Agric's Earth Shade from Citadel. Again, give it a good shake. And then apply it neat. Covering all the brown parts. The leather part up here as well. As I said, don't let it pool over the surfaces, but only in the recesses. Don't forget the shield area here, as well as the plume. And the back of the shield, where it can pool a little bit more. If you feel like it's pooling, wipe it off with a damp with a damp brush. But here you can see the leather armor coming out beautifully. As well as the shield. It's quite alright as well. Okay. Oh, sorry, I got bumped here a little bit. My apologies for that. Now, this is what it looks like now before we apply the blue wash. And that's the final block wash. And that's some Drakenhof nightshade. And that will really make the blue areas really stand out. It will make sure that it has all the folds that we're going to highlight in a bit. May need one more. And on this figure I painted the upper part here blue. You could have done the same. Okay, with the shades done, I'm now going to turn my attention to these ones drying. And while they're drying, we're going to talk a little bit about the game. I'm going to turn the camera over here so you can see. Let's see if I close off the lights, it won't have so much glare. Yeah, maybe like that. Maybe a little bit easier. Wayland the board gamer. Wayland the board game is a game from Draco Ideas. It pits 2 to 4 players, takes around 60 to 90 minutes, and has a recommended age of 12 plus. The rule book is not heavy. There are a few pages. I would say the rule book is fairly well written. As I said before, the game is set in the ancient land of Brigantia. It's a Celtic land still in the era of magic, where players are building their kind of like armies and fight each other, trying to control the lands as well as fight it out with on the battlefield. So you look at the scenario booklet or scenario page in the back of the rulebook, and you build the map according to the scenario and how many players you are. Then each players will actually take 5 hero cards, and they will actually select one of them, pass the others to the other player, and then you will select another hero from the passing hand you will get. And until you will have 5 starting heroes. This will be your 5 starting adventurers or heroes, whatever you want to call them. And you will have a match where you play, kind of like an area where you place them, and then you're ready to start going, more or less. Now, I'm not going to go through every single rule of the game. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. This game, combat is dice driven, but it's not just regular T6 dice. It's like has these beautifully like red, blue, green and yellow dice that has symbols on them instead of like regular like 1 to 6 T6 D6. So it has these beautiful tiles as well. They come in different lands such as grassland, forest, mountains and so on. Each hex can also have like a stone kind of like wall here that blocks line of sight sometimes, and mountains can also block line of sight. So on your turn, it's very easy. You will actually activate one of your heroes, and you will spend activation points, or action points actually. So you will activate a hero, and you can do 6 things on your turn, and each of them will cost different amount of action points. You can travel, which means that you will take your hero. Let's take one that is actually dry here. we'll put this one over here so it dries. This one is dry because I don't want to paint all over the game. This is an unpainted figure. This is kind of like a mage or a healer, something like that. You can see that they're really beautifully sculpted. And you can have a max. You have a max number of heroes in a tile. And that's called an area capacity. You can have a maximum of 3 adventurer per tile. So that's it. But you can also, the first thing most people will do is that they will travel, which means that you activate the adventurer, and each move costs 0, 1 or 2 action points depending on the terrain type. Two areas will be considered adjacent when they share the side of a board. Now, an area will be considered visible when it's in the direct line of sight. A line of sight, I will talk about that in a little bit. So you will simply spend action points. So if you want to move from here to here, you will spend a certain number of points. If you want to move from here to here and here, you will spend other points. So, like I said, I'm not going to go through every single rule of the game, just give you a quick overview. Besides traveling, you can also heal wounded comrades. That takes place usually after combat, and combat's a big part of this game. You can activate special abilities, because each adventurer has a special ability that allows them to perform a unique action or use actions when they're not active. And exactly what these abilities do and what you can use, how you can use them appears on each adventurer's card. So you can see here Brigg has a unique ability because he's a squire. He can help fellow party members located in the same square or same hex within an additional one range. This will cost 1 action point. Okay, so Brigg here has that ability. Other heroes will have different other special abilities. So keep that in mind when you're playing the game. Don't forget about your special abilities. You can also do exploration points. You can go and explore, because this is close to what I would say a 4X game. 4X stands for explore, expand, exploit and exterminate. So I wouldn't say particularly if it is a 4X game, but it does have the explore part, and I really like exploration games, so that's really nice. So an active adventure can spend 1 action point to explore a given area. Exploration allows the adventurer to identify an area's stronghold, and you can explore up to 2 areas per activation. And this is a beautiful part of the game. Now, if you are over here, for example, and you explore this area here, okay, and then you flip it over, and you reveal a certain stronghold. Strongholds can be can also be conquered. And if you want to conquer a stronghold, that's another area that you can do. And it simply means that you roll the dice and you want to try to get hits, and you want to make sure that those hits exceed the number of points that are on the stronghold. And if you actually conquer a stronghold, you will gain one of these talks, and talks is actually victory points in this game. You will normally play your first game until 7 victory points. But in the scenarios, you can have more victory points as well. You can also gain these talks not just from exploring and conquering strongholds, but also from meeting your objectives that is going to be in the objective deck, and you could have different objectives per players. So that's a nice thing. And I have to say something about these talks as well, because you're probably wondering why they're called talks. What's the point of this? Why can't they just call them VPs or stars or points or whatever you want to call them? But talks, this is actually a really nice flavor of the game, because talks were a symbol of power, wealth and status in the Celtic Celtic world, not just mythology. So if you wore a talk around your wrist or around your neck, it was a symbol that you'd done something phenomenally, maybe defeated an enemy chieftain, or won great fame or something, or done something of a great importance to your tribe. So that's also why these talks are found in gold and silver and bronze and different kind of metals all over Europe in archaeological digs. So I happen to be a great history buff, so I really like this kind of like nice touch. So well done, Draco Ideas, for bringing in these into the game, not just one VP. Nice one. But besides that, we can actually now look at. Oh, it was already dry. Nice. Okay, good. I thought it was leaning to the card here, and it was going to be. As you can see here, it's drying quite nicely. Hopefully will be done on time. Now, I'm not going to be too lengthy here. Now, when it comes to combat, an active adventurer can attack enemies in any area within reach. And an area will be considered within reach when the adventurer has the appropriate weapons for that particular range. So now, if you look at this Brigg character is a melee character, which means he attacks in close range. And range is decided by this. Close range is the same hex, and then you have medium range is attacks in adjacent areas over here, and adjacent hex, that is. And long range is, of course, the third row, so there would be 2 hexes away, so 1, 2. This would be long range. So if, for example, this guy was over here, then Brigg couldn't attack him because he uses a melee weapon. So keep that in mind. He may have special abilities that I may have overlooked that he actually can, but like I said, I'm not going into very details. He actually says here that he is a Celtic guardian. And you say Celtic here, there are different, not just everyone is a different Celtic tribe. No, because you have to keep in mind that this is a fantasy world. You have werewolves and you have different kinds of magical creatures and so on and so forth. I'll give you a brief overlook of what they are. You have Celtics, werewolves, Mourians, and Fomorians. Fomorians are kind of like, these what do you call them, cyclopses from the Greek mythology. Mourians live in a matriarchal society, and they are revered by humans that take part in the Celtic coronation rituals and much less frequently in trade. So it's a nice fluff text that I'm reading from the rulebook. You can see here, I'm going to show you some of the artwork here. This is the Mourians. It's really nice. Some of the concept art that they included, this is really nice. And so, of course, here, this is what the Celtics look like. Fairly humans, werewolves, looks not like stereotypical werewolves like you see from Hollywood, but it's a nice touch. So when it comes to combat, you try to roll dice. You try to attack your opponent with these dice. You try to get hits. Any one of these hits, as far as I know, is a direct hit, which means like you automatically hit. I could be wrong with this one, so please forgive me, Draco Ideas, if I get that wrong. Of course, but not only, this is a nice touch as well. You not only do I roll dice, but the defender rolls a dice as well. And that's kind of like the blocking dice. And this is a nice touch, and I really like this part of this game, is that when you attack and you roll hits, say for example I rolled 3 hits and he rolled 2 block, okay, that means 1 damage goes through and he takes an injury. And that's where the healing part comes in as well. So, but however, if I roll 3 hits and he rolled 3 block, then nothing happens. No injuries happening and nothing and so forth. But say, for example, I rolled 3 hits and he rolled, for some reason, 4 block. That means he counterattacks and he hurts me instead. And that's a really nice take on the game, because in most games, when I block, I can't do damage back unless I have something in a unique ability or so in other games. And I like that way. So combat is always at a risk. But before you can also decide on combat, you also have to declare line of sight. And line of sight is also, it makes this more of a war game than your traditional war game. But it is not a war game as well. It's more like, I wouldn't say in a comparison, because I haven't actually played something that is really close to this game. But you have line of sight, and line of sight means that that's what I said, short range, medium range and long range. And line of sight can only be obstructed by rock formations or by special rules. So rock formations, these are rock formations. So for example, if I turn this around here to this side, well, this rock formation blocks line of sight. Another thing you can actually do is you can go into battle in a formation. So formation are comprised of 3 to 5 adventurers deployed across 3 adjacent enemy-free areas. And that means that you can go in, for example, you can go in a wedge formation, or you can go into a demi-orb or a phalanx, and so on and so forth. And that gives you certain advantages. So if you break formations, and then you get like, you know, formation tokens and so on, and that's really nice. And when it comes to these stone walls as well, not only do they break line of sight, but they also reduce the capacity for each for every adventure to be in. So one rock, which is 2 blocked sides in this case, reduces the capacity to 2 instead of 3. So that's also something to consider when you're moving in. And like always, it's always when you build the kind of like the first adventures, the 5 adventures, when kind of like drafting these cards, it's always nice to keep in mind: do I want to go all melee? Do I want to go all ranged? Will I? Because I will see the map in advance, of course. And will I go for special abilities? Will I at least try to keep one healer? Probably a good idea if you play D&D. You always want to go in with a cleric or a paladin. But in this case, it's also nice, what do I have and what my opponents have? So because I get to see his cards when he drafts them, and you know, he hands me his cards. Okay, I know that maybe he chose one guardian, maybe he chose a healer. I have no idea what he actually gets, and that's actually a nice take as well. Every game is going to be completely different, not just based on the adventures you choose, but also on the terrain and the map you chose as well. There is special scenarios as well. There is a 2 versus 2 game mode, which means you can cooperate. There are special scenarios. There are also games you can actually have events, and that gives you a little bit of a challenge when it comes to the game itself, and it increases the replay value. Now, when I mentioned talks as well, talks are the only way to achieve victory. So that means you gain talks by conquering these strongholds, you gain talks by completing objectives. Knocking an adventurer down is one talk, conquering a stronghold is another talk. Other cases, certain abilities drawn talks as well. And you knock an area down when he's completely knocked out and can't perform actions. So normally you have healthy. That's what you are when you start the game. You're wounded, when it means you receive damage, and you're fallen, which means that you're completely knocked out and can't perform any actions. And knocked out, a wounded adventurer hit during combat will be knocked to the ground. Rotate the adventurer 90 degrees to indicate the adventurer has fallen. Reading from the game here, rule book, so I actually get it right. So when it comes to when you're knocked out, you actually you're taking damage. So taking damage means that you can actually you won't lose victory points, but you will give victory points to your opponent. This is a brief overview of the game. If you like this one, I can strongly recommend going into the Draco Ideas, the board game on their website. But right now we're going to focus our attention to the painting as well. It's almost dry, and I'm going to go over to the final stage of this video, which is going to be the highlights, because it looks a little bit too dirty right now, and we're going to go into this stage right now. And the first part of this highlight stage is we're going to paint some neutral grey on the fur coat of the miniature. And not just neutral grey, is that we're going to dry brush it. And dry brushing means that you actually put a lot of paint on the brush and then wipe off most of the brush or most of the paint off on a piece of kitchen towel. So it will give kind of like a heavy dry brush, giving it some nice highlighting forms on this area here. That's a nice and easy way to actually highlight this one, and then it actually gives it a done look. Now, with that said, we're actually going to apply the original dried bark, but we might actually want to mix in a little bit of a different color. What I meant was to say was Rhinox high, but I'm going to use dried bark instead, because for the highlight, and I'm going to apply it neat over the leg areas, but not the armor leg areas. And the reason for that is that I want to only cover the raised areas maybe I should put this into the view over the camera. Only erased areas, leaving it in so anything that is behind here, I leave it out. And that means you can see the highlights easier. Same thing here. Can put it down. Turn this one over a little bit. Probably why you didn't see anything, because I changed the angle of the camera. My apologies for that. A little bit too much on the bristles, covering this area here, and this area here behind you. Just a small streaks here. And the idea with the highlight is to actually paint not the same color, but you can do that in different layers and highlight up to the raised to the paint you want. But the idea here is to actually see there's a slight color variation here. Now for the shoes, I'm going to apply the original color, which is Mournfang brown. Back over here. And again here, on the raised areas only. You wouldn't leave some of the shading as well. And while we're still at it, we can also paint parts of the shield with this one. The same Mournfang brown, leaving a very, very little paint on the brush. And the back side, just smoothing out the edges really. And that's it. For the leather areas, I'm going to use some neat application of red leather. Of the edges here. And just the edges. And very little paint on the brush. Here I'm going to paint only the surface areas and not the edges. Sorry. Surface areas. And a little bit less on the other side because it's obscured. And I want to make sure that the bottom part is more shaded. So therefore I'm leaving more parts shadowed over there. Something like this. Same thing goes for the leather braces here. or leather, like only the surface areas. The raised areas I have another plan for. And that goes for the leather and most of the brown areas highlights. Now let's turn our attention to the metal areas, because that's really gonna, and we finish off with, we can finish this one off with some dried bark as well. All right. Now let's go over to the metal parts. Cleaning the brush, hopefully not bumping the camera. And I'm going to use a color called from Vallejo, Vallejo's game color series, called Chainmail Silver. Oops. And here I want to pick out parts of the area here on the band, as well as this part. A bit too much paint on the palette on this one, but I can actually paint out some of the silver parts over here. The shield boss. See if I can. I'm very lightly painting these kind of like studs here, as well as the studs inside the shield here. Very, very subtle effect. Painting out the brim, the blade of the shield, of the blade of the sword. And a little bit on the side here of the shield of the hand guard. And now this is for the final, for these ones here, I'm going to put some metal parts here. And then a little bit on the helmet, small touch, making sure the helmet is darker. Something like this. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Now, finally, we're going to go on to a gold paint. This is called Retributor Armor from Citadel, and we're going to use that for parts of the sword, as per the card art. because the card art actually says the pommel of the sword is made out of gold. As well as part of the lower end of the sword as well. Now that's the only gold part of the miniature. Hopefully you can see that. Now we're going to turn our attention to this little strap here. This is some red leather that we forgot. As well as the red leather on the belt as well. You can paint it Mournfang brown if you want to as well. Smart part, I forgot that. Now let's put our attention to the blue parts, because that's going to be a significant part of the miniature and really going to make it pop. And we're going to go for Vallejo's regular blue, which is kind of a lighter color than the royal blue. And we're only going to paint over the folds. As well as over here. This is a very easy highlight, and you can go over it in a couple of stages. And you can, if you think it's too dark in between, you can go a little bit in the fold, but not too much. And just the upper part here that something like this. For the final highlight, we're going to go for some Calidor Sky from Citadel, and that's a small highlight.